My colleague and I in this presentation come to you as supporters of the Kimberley Refugee Resettlement Group. This group was formed in November 2015 in response to the worldwide refugee crisis. I'm sure that all of you have heard of the migrant crisis in Europe and of the hundreds of thousands of people fleeing the conflicts in the Middle East and elsewhere. In this presentation, we will give you more facts and figures on the size of the problem, go into some detail on how Canada has responded in the past and how it is responding today. We'll tell you how the community of Kimberley is responding, more about the resettlement process for the refugees coming to Canada, and then tell you how you personally can help.
Let's start by looking at what a refugee is and the size of the problem. These refugees are not economic migrants like many of us. They are not moving to Canada because they want to. They're moving because they are vulnerable in their own country and have been forced out. Those fleeing Syria often do so because they are being persecuted and risk death for any of a number of categories, usually at least race, religion, and political opinions. Many of us here have been migrants. We understand the disruption of voluntarily giving up one life for a new life in a different country. Think how much more difficult it would be for someone who is not coming here voluntarily, someone who has fled the disruption of war and killing because they and their families were in imminent danger.
We hear frequently of the million migrants in Europe who have crossed dangerous seas and walked for hundreds of miles to claim sanctuary in Germany, Sweden, Croatia, France, and other EEC countries. But they are just the tip of the iceberg. Today, worldwide, there are nearly 60 million displaced people fleeing war, terror, and persecution. 4 out of 5 of these are women and children.
Syria is foremost in today's news stories. This turmoil is not new. There has been some form of disruption in this area for over 100 years. The conflict driving the current exodus started in 2011 with rebellion against Syria's President al-Assad, terror, and ethnic cleansing. Now things have been made infinitely worse with the rise of ISIL. 12 million people have been driven from their homes. Over 200,000 have been killed in the conflict. In 2011, Syria's population was about 22 million. 70 to 74% of these were Sunni Muslim. The ruling sect, the Alawites, made up about 10%. In 2015, the population is estimated at only 18 million, of which 8 million are internally displaced within Syria.
This slide shows the current population of refugees in the countries surrounding Syria. They do not include the migrants that have moved on to claim asylum in Europe. It should be noted that these numbers often represent a high percentage of their host country's population. For example, refugees are 10% of the population of Jordan. But serious as it most assuredly is, Syria is not the only focal point with the refugee challenge. There are tens of millions displaced by 15 other conflicts in Europe, Asia, and Africa.
The United Nations High Commission for Refugees is the UN's global agency for refugees. They defined 3 main ways that refugees cease to be refugees. First, they voluntarily go back to their home areas. In the case of Syria, that possibility may be years away. The conflicts are not yet settled, and the infrastructure has been devastated by the war. However, it is known that many in the refugee camps around Syria will not want to migrate elsewhere, since they want to go home as soon as they can. That means that the camps may not be as temporary as the UN and other aid agencies would like. This suggests that one priority should be recognizing this and improving the conditions in the camps to sustain a reasonable level of living for several years. Kimberley Refugee Resettlement Group will therefore use any excess funds to support this approach. Second, refugees become integrated into the local communities in the country of asylum. There are obvious challenges with this when the refugees are a large portion of the population in the asylum country. As mentioned, the refugees now make up more than 10% of the population of Jordan alone, for example. Third, other countries, such as Canada and the USA, accept refugees for permanent resettlement. This is the program put in place by the Government of Canada to bring 25,000 Syrian refugees to Canada in the next few months. We support this program and will tell you more about it and how we in Kimberley fit into it.
Why do we bother? It is because we recognize that what is happening in the Middle East means the need to find places to resettle refugees is greater than ever. But we also recognize that sponsoring a refugee family does not change just their life. It has a positive change to all our lives. Canada prides itself on being a multicultural and ethnically diverse country. We recognize we are enriched with new people and new cultures. Canada has traditionally accepted around 12,000 refugees every year. We have a long history of reaching out to those in need in other countries, but less than 0.5% of refugees are likely to gain resettlement in a safe and secure country. But this crisis is unprecedented in scale, and the Canadian government has ramped up its support. 25,000 refugees will be brought to Canada in the next few months. This is still a small number in the general scheme of things because strict rules will be applied. The refugees can only be referred to Canada by the United Nations Refugee Agency unless identified and sponsored by private groups. The Canadian government has said that it will prioritise the most vulnerable groups: families, women at risk, and sexual minorities, migrants already in Europe, Germany, France, and so on, and single men will be very low in the priority list. Once the refugees have been identified and security cleared, they will be flown to reception centres in several major cities before being moved to where they are being resettled. We hope 2 families will come to Kimberley.
To summarize the process, once the UN High Commission for Refugees has confirmed refugee status, medical, security, and criminality checks will be carried out. Once that is done, they are placed in the Canadian Resettlement Program and given local sponsors. As mentioned earlier, there are 2 main sponsorship options: private sponsorship and a blended sponsorship where responsibility for the refugees is shared between a local sponsor and the Government of Canada. We are pursuing the blended sponsorship in support of the refugees being brought to Canada by the Canadian government.
The Canadian government selects and vets the refugees and brings them to Canada. From there, the local sponsors assume the day-to-day responsibilities with some assistance from the government. We commit up to a year of support. If the refugees become financially independent earlier and no longer need our help in the community, the sponsorship ends. Any of our surplus funds can then be used for other refugee support, including improving conditions in the camps. So how do we in the City of Kimberley fit into this? To date, we have formed the Kimberley Refugee Resettlement Group with a directing committee. We are actively working with many groups in the local community. Subcommittees have been formed to raise funds, engage in the refugee process, and to communicate our activities to the community of Kimberley. This presentation is one example of that. We've also begun building a communications infrastructure, including a Facebook page, website, and email address. We've made contact and are working with an equivalent initiative in Cranbrook with the aim of sharing our knowledge and experience.
But obviously there is much to do before we can accept and support refugees in Kimberley. We need more communications resources, fundraising, people to form the various support teams, and so on. It should be noted that this is not likely to be a one-off campaign. The refugee problem is not going away. The initial 25,000 to be settled in Canada will not be the last. We are therefore taking pains to set up an organization in Kimberley that will persist and be supportable in the long term.
To provide for a year for 2 families of 4 or the equivalent, it is estimated we will need a total of approximately $54,000. This estimate is based on the experience of groups already supporting resettlement, such as the Anglican Church. The chart breaks down this estimate into more detail. Government-assisted refugees, upon their arrival to British Columbia, receive Resettlement Assistance Programme (RAP) income benefits that follow the same rates as provincial income support rates. RAP benefits include monthly contributions towards shelter, transportation and food. In addition, Citizenship and Immigration Canada provides a one-time start-up allowance for such things as clothing, telephone installation, toiletries and other household staples. So we expect to receive approximately $20,000 from the Canadian government, which leaves us with needing to raise around $34,000 in cash or in kind.
What are we committing ourselves to? Apart from the financial side, there is a lot. This chart summarizes the major activities. It is important that we are well prepared. You only get one chance to make a good first impression. It is traumatic arriving in a new country, especially if you do not know the language or anyone there. We will need to make this as good an experience as possible. It looks a daunting task, but just like everything complicated, any project is easier if broken down into smaller chunks.
The current committee looks like this. Our main needs for additional help and support are the 2 blue boxes, fundraising and settlement planning. In the short term, the fundraising team will have the most pressure on it. Once funding is in place and refugees are on their way, settlement planning will be the main activity. There's a lot to think about and do. There will be a number of teams, each with their own role and responsibilities. The settlement planning teams are likely to look something like this chart, but it will be refined as we move forward. As soon as the family is settled, an orientation tour will be needed. Where are the shops, the doctor, the dentist, the bus stops, and so on. We will also need to assist with the government paperwork, benefits, social insurance numbers, medical plans, and so on. And it's not as easy to open a bank account as it used to be. In addition, the concept of bank accounts, cheques, and credit cards are not as universal as we tend to assume. The families will need help setting these up and possibly learning to manage them. We won't know much about the work experience of the refugees before they arrive. We should not assume that any minimum wage job will be suitable. In any case, we will need to help the refugees transfer their skills and experience to the Canadian environment. The refugees will already have cleared customs and immigration, so the main task here is to be there for them. Hopefully, we will have some idea as to their language skills and have someone available as interpreter if needed. The planning here needs to cover both public and private transportation. Do the refugees have driving licenses that would be accepted in BC? Will their education or jobs training or jobs require more than the available public transport? If a car is required, should it be purchased or leased? Social activities will be an important part of integrating the refugees into our community. There are lots of opportunities, but it is likely that they will mostly be new concepts for the refugees. One challenge may be finding opportunities for the refugees to practice their faith. There isn't a mosque in the area, so options need to be identified and explored.
So what will each of the teams need to think about? Once we know when the refugees will arrive, housing will be busy. Appropriate accommodation will need to be in place and available before they arrive. For anyone who has set up a house from scratch, there's a lot to think about, from furniture to appliances to suitable clothing to having the basic foodstuffs in place. We will also need to be knowledgeable about what foods are acceptable. For example, if the refugee is Muslim, meat will need to be halal, and pork products are not an option. Once the refugees arrive, the health and education teams will need to be ready to assist. Setting up initial visits to both the doctor and the dentist will likely be high on the agenda. Fortunately, we have access to excellent medical and dental care in Kimberley. Kimberley is blessed with good schools, but there will be issues around placement in an appropriate level class, and language skills may be a challenge. Fortunately, children are usually good at quickly picking up the local language. As you can see, there is no shortage of opportunities for anyone who wants to help. If you want to discuss the possibility of helping with your time and skills, please approach one of the committee members. We will always be grateful for any financial or in-kind donations. And above all, we ask for you to be supportive of what we are doing. It has been said that we should forget what's happening overseas and concentrate on our own challenges, the homeless, food banks, and so on. However, if we ignore the problems overseas, pretty soon they will become so big that they will inevitably become our problems as well. So please share your thoughts and ideas with us. Be positive about our efforts and encourage others to help in any way they can. We welcome your feedback and questions and your support. Thank you for listening today, and please do feel free to contact us.